Hey, how about Mr. Palmer, Mike Palmer? Tell us, what has been your silver lining during this disruption?
Silver lining, I guess if it were, I'll actually bring it back to the work world, and I love seeing other people's lives brought, their personal lives brought into the work world.
Yeah.
It adds a lot of humor and a lot better connections with people.
I totally agree. It looks like you've got a pretty nice personal background there, so congratulations on that.
I'm trying to escape what will inevitably be a lot of interruption.
Oh, that's great.
It's temporary.
Perfectly acceptable. I see a couple Heathers, whichever one wants to go first. Ms. Kraft and Ms. Kinhan. Either which
Kernahan.
silver linings.
Kernahan. We actually work together, the two Heathers, so we are fairly interchangeable.
Oh,
yeah, we're the Heathers in the company that we work for. We both, I'll speak for Heather too, we travel a ton in our job, and I've been with my husband for almost 30 years, and the silver lining is that I've gotten to know him again because I've been on the ground
beautiful.
for months and months, and that's a joy.
And you like him? You still like him?
I still like him a lot. It's
Beautiful.
good.
Beautiful.
Yeah, that's been great.
That's awesome. And the other Heather, is your silver lining not having to be in the office with the other Heather? Is that what the issue is? No.
No, that is not it. But
okay, good.
It is similar to Heather's, and not that I'm at home with a husband, but I have not spent this much time in the city that I actually live in I have no idea how many years. And so it's been good to get to spend some time locally, actually, and see a different routine for sure.
Beautiful. How about you, Mr. Klein? Robert, down there at the bottom? Silver lining is the question. What's been your silver lining?
Oh, there's been so many silver linings. It's really been, I traveled a lot in my work, and so I've not had to travel for the last 6 months, so that's been a real silver lining. Spending more time with family, of course, and little things like working out of my home. I've gotten to know all the birds around my house that I never paid attention to before.
Oh, that's awesome.
All those things, they're not so silver that I want to keep them. Let's get back to normal. Let's get through this.
Well, I will actually challenge you on that, because my whole focus, I just started a nonprofit foundation called GoForwardToWork. And the idea is that I think we should use this as a positive inflection point, never go back to work, but let's go forward to work and use this as a positive change momentum. So I'll be challenging the back to normal idea, but I appreciate the idea.
I do like the way you phrase that. That sounds, I like that phraseology.
How about, look, there's some incredibly handsome men and women on the pages that are not showing their videos. So I would love to have y'all come on and say hi.
Yeah, I think it's a good place to start after the mention of Go Forward to Work, Keith. So, if y'all are just joining, we're doing things a little bit differently than we have. So if you feel comfortable to take yourself off mute and put your video on, we definitely want this to be a community-driven event for all of our Battery members. Keith joining us tonight is a Battery member too. He's in LA, but he's joining us. We've been talking about silver linings, and I think Keith is going to talk to us a lot about what it means to be a leader in this type of environment and touch on a little bit more about the Go Forward to Work. So I'll just briefly introduce him for those of you who are not familiar with Keith's work. He is the author of Never Eat Alone, Who's Got Your Back, and most recently, Leading Without Authority. He's the founder and chairman of Ferrazzi Greenlight, which is an executive team coach to some of the most prominent organizations in the world. And he is a thought leader and frequent contributor to several publications, including Forbes, Wall Street Journal, and Fast Company. He's been on the forefront of remote team transitions since his published research appeared in the Harvard Business Review in 2015. So Keith, I'll pass it over to you, and take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Colleen. So listen, I want to try to demonstrate as much as possible the ideas that I'm going to be communicating. And then we can do a bunch of Q&A. The first thing I did when we joined this meeting was I started to create some psychological safety that allowed us to engage in a fundamentally different way than one would normally engage in a virtual setting, right? So in virtual settings, you typically have these waiting rooms and you come in, you start to talk, and it's just all so stiff and formal. But there's absolutely no need for it. This idea of a small exercise at the beginning of a meeting, and it doesn't even have to be this. I'm gonna actually show you something that I want you to think about when you think about, I'm going to be going on and off of some slides. So people focus on physical distance when you're running your teams or doing your work. What we have found in our research is that physical distance is not the problem when it comes to remote work. The problem is that distance gets created as a result of not being around each other, but it's specific types of distance. It's strategic distance. In the olden days, alignment was created in small organic ways. You walk out of a meeting and then you have the meeting after the meeting, right? The walk down the hallway, the pop into each other's offices, the kibitzing. That unfortunately doesn't exist. And those informal processes of work need to be re-engineered in a remote environment for you to be more effective as a leader. We're going to talk about how do you close strategic distance in a remote world. And I'll tell you something, at the end of this, I will swear to you, and I believe if you implement these tips and practices, that you can have a more powerful team in a remote environment than you did when you were in a physical environment. I swear that I can promise you that, and I can show you the data that shows the proof of that in our research. The other type of distance is operational distance. So how are you planning meetings? How are you creating a cadence of process of doing work? What we're going to talk about there is how in a remote environment you can begin to adopt Agile at the team and executive functioning level of an organization. So Agile isn't just a process by which you use the programming and product development. Agile can be used in an executive level functioning. And I'm going to show you how using remote is a more effective way to implement Agile and be able to get a lot more done than you ever got done before. And finally, affinity distance. Affinity distance is created when the team loses that intimacy, that connection, that bonding that a team gains by virtue of being in the same proximity, the lunch conversations, the walking out to, get a breath of air, those kind of things. And you've got to engineer that as a leader. What I just did when I started the meeting by saying, hey, what's your silver lining? That was a way in which to gain affinity distance, to cite an affinity distance. At the beginning of meetings, one of the things I always do is a very quick thing called a sweet and sour. A sweet and sour. A sweet and sour is when everybody says, what's going on in your life right now that's sweet? What's going on in your life that's sour? And you could do it like this. I could say, well, sweet is I've just launched a new foundation. I'm really excited about it. And we're approaching some really powerful issues, and I couldn't be more excited. This GoForwardToWork Foundation. Sour, I have a very lazy 25-year-old who is using every excuse of the COVID not to be productive. And so I'm struggling with how to hold him accountable. I got him at 16. He had a lot of bad habits that I've had to try to undo. And unfortunately, I've only done this much of it. And I'm doing my best. I'm trying to hold him accountable, but I struggle. I really struggle. That's a sweet and sour. You could certainly go on a little longer if you wanted to curate the time. Your ability to do something like this, particularly here we are, we don't know each other. But what happens if all of a sudden you were a leader of a team and this many people showed up and some of them were of different constituencies, you've never met them before, you've called this meeting, you get everybody here, you need to create psychological safety so people can have risk taking, so people can tell the truth, And that's what you do. Now, one of the things I would do, one of the most powerful, and I'm going to call on Colleen for a second. I know this is really rude, Colleen. I don't know if you can do it quickly, but if you can, let me know. If I sent you all into breakout rooms, how many of you, raise your hands if you've used breakout rooms in Zoom? Okay, so this is a tech crowd. Okay, I got it. You've used it. So I might not have to prove it, but right now what we could do is we could push a single button, send everybody into breakout rooms of 2 or 3. You could do a 3-minute sweet and sour where you actually get to take your time, share with a small group of people what's really going on in your life right now, right? Open up a little vulnerably. And if you as the leader led it here, right, with a little bit of vulnerability, you'd get more vulnerability when they went in the small group. And then when you come back, the whole room would be more connected. You would, even though the whole room wouldn't have heard everybody, the psychological dynamic would have changed the dynamic of the room as a whole. Does this make sense to people? Mm-hmm. Very simple tools. And I also host entire meetings. What I do for a living is I coach teams. My company coaches teams. We go in and we coach the Mary Bar and the executive team of General Motors. through transformation. We're doing Delta Airlines through their transformation. We're doing Verizon through their transformation. I personally coach the executive teams of these companies to be more effective in a remote world than they ever were before, right? And then my company does other teams. Now, we used to do full dinners. We used to show up and do a dinner and a day with a team. And we did it 6 times before the team really adopted new habits. 6 times. Now I'll do a 1-hour remote dinner and a separate 3 to 4 hour meeting. And I'll give you some tips on how do you design a 3 to 4 hour meeting that is fun and vivacious and exciting and engaging that will fundamentally transform your staff meetings. But that 1-hour bonding meeting is the same thing as the dinner we used to do. Now, the dinner we used to have red wine and tequila, which was awesome, right? And sometimes we rented the wine room at the Battery. But in the absence of that, still curated storytelling in a 1-hour session where people, and here's one of the most powerful questions you can ask your team. What experience of their past truly changes and makes up who they are today? What experience of your past truly changes and makes up who you are today? And then you as a leader would start to share. And you would share that your father was an extraordinarily generous but ambitious and driven, wanted everything for you, and you wanted to live up to those expectations. And as an Italian immigrant, that dad, pedestalized you, and holy hell, when you found out when you were in your teens that you were gay, that really screwed things up. And all you ever wanted to do was be a perfectionist for your dad. I mean, I don't know if that was your story or if that was my story, but anyway, whosever story that was, the idea is you share as vulnerably and as authentically as you have the courage to do. You'll now invite your team to do the same, and you will have a team more bonded than they ever were when they were in a physical environment. So I don't want to spend more time on this, but what we've been just now talking about is affinity distance, right? Let me show you, we've been studying teams and team effectiveness for about 15 years. Many of you know me for my work at Never Eat Alone, which is a networking book, but my real work is leadership in teams. We have been studying, and these 8 areas are high-performing team competencies. If you want to have a high-performing team, you have a team that is so candid that it speaks truth in the room, no conflict avoidance. If the real conversation happens when the meeting ends, then that's a poor team. Now, many of us sit on those teams and many of us lead those teams, and we've got to stop it. We've got to stomp it out. I'm going to show you how in a remote world, you can actually have a more candid team than you did otherwise. Collaboration. By the way, do you realize that 70% of teams claim that they cannot speak up honestly in the room? 70%. 74% of teams claim that they do not use the team for collaborative problem solving. They do their collaboration externally and then they plug their work into the team. They're not using the team that they sit on for collaboration. So these are areas and elements of high-performing teams. And what we believe you have an opportunity to do in a remote environment is the following. Go into, and I'll give you a piece of paper to be able to follow a script on this. It's called a recontracting with your team. I want you to go back to your teams and I want you to say to your teams, hey folks, here's the deal. We're now in a remote environment and we're going to be sticking in it for a while. I saw this guy give a talk the other night and I want us to discuss how we're performing in a remote world against these high-performing team criteria. How candid are we? How collaborative are we? Are we coaching each other? That's what development is. In a high-performing developing team, the team becomes the coach of each other, not just you as a leader coaching the members of the team. Are we lifting each other's energy up, or is it all up to me to run around playing whack-a-mole, lifting everybody up? No, the team needs to step up. There's a word I created for this in the new book. I wrote a new book. It's called Leading Without Authority. Leading Without Authority. And in this new book, I open up a new word called co-elevation. A high-performing team is committed to the mission, but committed to each other and committed to going higher together. They're committed to squeezing the juice out of the team for more collaboration, for lifting each other's energy up, to committing to build relationships that are strong and care enough to tell the truth. They're committed to exponential outcomes. They're committed to holding each other accountable, not just holding accountable to you as a leader. So these are the elements, and what I'm going to give you is a script for you to go into your teams and say, in a remote world, how do we build these competencies? And then you diagnose as a team which ones you want to start working on. And what I'm going to give you today is a few practices that will begin to dial these areas up: more candor, more collaboration, more peer-to-peer accountability. I'll give you some tools to add into your remote meetings that will help on this. So the first step is get that script and begin to have that conversation with your team. So the most important thing that I'm so far that I'm saying is, you have an old social contract with your team, and I want you to reboot it. And you can use, by the way, I've been doing this work for 20 years before we were remote. But now I'm just using the fact that we're remote as an excuse to change the norms of a team. Because teams usually sucked. And I'll show you what I mean by that. Over 15 years of tracking high-performing and low-performing teams, the average team in red self-diagnoses that from an accountability perspective, on a scale of 0 to 5, is this a highly accountable team, and we hold each other accountable? 3.4. Are we able to speak truth together in the room? 2.4. Are we using each other for collaboration and innovation? 2.5, the red circle. And what happens is, when you recontract and a team makes a commitment to rise in these areas, after about 3 to 6 months of you making that commitment and changing some of your practices along these, which I'm going to give you, you can move out to the green. And this is, like I said, this is what we're doing for many large organizations like General Motors, Verizon, et cetera. But these are also practices that are used in your own backyard with startups like Vero Money and many others in your own backyard. Now, what I want to do is I want to start with one of the areas, collaboration, because this is one of the areas that suffers the most in remote meetings, which is this interaction that happens in the room. I would like you to begin to think of your meetings in 15-minute increments. No more than 15 minutes before there's some engaged interaction with your team. I'll give you a few. One of them is at the beginning. Of course, you're going to do maybe a breakout with a personal professional check-in, etc. Somewhere in the middle of the meeting, if you're worried about candor and whether or not you're getting enough candor in the room, you can do a candor break. A candor break in the middle of the meeting is you stop and you say to the room, what's not being said that needs to be said right now? Like, what are we saying that we're inhaling our own exhaust fumes? What am I saying as a leader that deserves to be challenged, that no one's challenging me? I think every meeting deserves a candor break somewhere in the middle of the meeting. Now, what part of the issue is that the room will start to believe that you really want it. Now, if you just said that to an open room, you'd get crickets. You say that to an open room, push a button and put everybody into breakout rooms of 2. Tell them to write in a Google Doc what they think needs to be said that isn't said. Have them come back into the main room and report out. Now you're getting truth. We've been doing town halls for months now. One of the things that I'm encouraging was enterprise-wide town halls where we ask for input. Like, one of the things we did recently, we took the top 1,000 leaders of a company, we broke everybody down into groups of 3, and we asked the question, what's the biggest risk to us not making our numbers this year? Everybody put it into a Google Doc. 1,000 people came back, and then we paused the meeting and we said, we're going to analyze the data and we're going to come back to you with another meeting tomorrow. And the next day, the leadership team said to the group, you blew our minds. There's 5 areas that we're actually initiating new initiatives around risk minimization thanks to your input. We did this with a large financial services company. We took the whole sales force, had them break into small rooms, and we asked the question, what 1 or 2 tips have you been executing to onboard new accounts during this tumultuous time? We asked all the financials, these are financial advisors. There were thousands of them. And in small groups, they came up with the best tip they had to increase net new accounts during the pandemic. And they submitted it into a Google Doc. We did the analysis, ultimately read it back. We then invited these sales reps to join peer-to-peer coaching teams that would join a big meeting. We would share what we're learning. Then they'd go into small rooms, talk to each other about it, come back. Those who joined this peer-to-peer coaching in this breakout room advancement of roles got a 50% increase in net new accounts. This company had 50 billion net new accounts. We increased the net new accounts by $5 billion through this process, statistically allocated to those who were in these breakout groups. They got the lift over others. So the idea of using collaborative problem solving, that's the other issue, which is I want you to bring to your meetings questions, and I want you to ask your team members to bring questions. So if when I was chief marketing officer of Starwood Hotels, I might have brought to the room a question associated with the Star Preferred Guest program and some attribute that I was thinking about. I would have brought it to the room. They could have all gone to breakouts. They could have answered the question I had, report back, and now I would have had all of this data. Now, the one thing that's a challenge is this: if you're the leader of the team, you're not allowed to hijack people's authority when you're putting collaborative problem solving in the room. If you hijack people's authority, they don't want to bring questions into the room because they're afraid that the questions they bring won't be theirs to resolve. This is an asset to get more data and more innovation and more inclusion into the decision making. It's not intended for you or the team to get to consensus or to hijack people's decision making. It's intended to froth up the room in terms of ideas and input. So collaborative problem solving is one of the most powerful tools. It brings higher degrees of candor, higher degrees of innovation. You can fill your room of a diverse set of individuals, but if you don't have the inclusion of their voices, you have failed the benefit of a diverse population, whether it's diverse population of ideas or otherwise. These are some great questions you could use for collaborative problem solving with your team. What are the potential areas of growth or process improvement that we have seen over the last couple of months? What are some big hills that we still have to take in the next 6 months? That's a great question to have all of your team break into small groups, come back. You will begin to see if there's alignment, strategic alignment around what you're doing with a question like that, using collaborative problem solving. Now, I'm going to focus a little bit on Agile for a second. One of the things that we have seen is that most organizations at the peak of the pandemic were running an Agile process at the team level, whether they knew it or not. What I mean by that is, if you think about Agile as weekly or biweekly sprints, well, I'll give you an example. We were working with Delta Airlines before the pandemic hit, and we were doing quarterly sprints, and we were coaching the team at Delta Airlines to reinvent the travel industry. What would it look like to reinvent travel? So we were on these quarterly sprints, and all of a sudden the pandemic hit. Holy shit, we lost 90% of our revenue. We know we're going to emerge from this as a smaller airline. We had to move to daily sprints. All key threads of work had daily report ups, daily stand-ups. Now, if you run Agile and you do sprints, which is take the big hills of work and have these sprint owners report out where they are at the end of their sprints in terms of accountability to outcomes. What you're not doing is a process that we call bulletproofing. This squeezes the juice out of the team. Bulletproofing is when, let's say you've got one of your team members has a major thread of work they're working on. They show up and they do their report out. Now what you do, and their report out is really simple, like a normal sprint. What have they just done? What have they been struggling with? What are they planning to do? A simple, could be a 10 to 15 minute report out. No slides, just a conversation. Then you break your whole team into small groups, and each small group asks the following questions. Having listened to that report out, what is a risk that we think that person may be missing? Some challenge that we have for them. What is a crazy ass bold innovation that we would contribute to them that they could consider? And what offer of support or help do we want to give them? Now, if you get your team breaking in a small group, challenging each other in a positive way, innovating, out-innovating each other in a positive way, offering help and support in a positive way, you now have created the superfood of a high-performing team. This is a truly co-elevating team. What happens now in a physical or most remote environments, you do report out, you just move from one person to the other with no more than you having a conversation with the team member, and that's it. Bulletproofing is such a powerful way to unleash the collaborative potential and power of your team. So what I want you to think, the last thing I want you to think about in terms of remote, which is better than you would have had otherwise, is teaming out, I call it. Your team meetings are no longer limited to the people that report to you. You should invite anybody you want to and start asking your team, who could be invited into our meetings that would benefit from these conversations? You could have a 3-hour meeting and one part of the agenda is a collaborative problem solving question. And you're going to invite customers into that discussion. You're going to invite channel partners into that discussion. You're going to invite vendors into that discussion. You bring an expert for 10 minutes to have some input. And then they go away. It's the easiest thing in the world. You no longer have to worry about all, because your mindsets have been traditionally geared to these physical meetings. The big lesson I'm giving you is don't make your remote meetings as good as your physical meetings. Redefine making them better. When I ask a team the question, what do you most miss in a remote environment? And they'll say things like, oh gosh, I miss the serendipity of walking down the hallway, bumping into people and really learning something. And I said, well, okay, let's engineer better than that. And so the team goes into a CPS, collaborative problem solving. They go into small group. They say, how could we do serendipity better in a remote world? Well, one of the great company called NI, they came up with a great idea. The entire team, this was the executive team. They had thousands of people in the organization. The entire team identified 5 people every week that they would invite into a 15-minute touch base. So you had 15 team members of the executive team. Each one gets 5 touch bases of 15 minutes each. And in those quick touch bases, an employee from somewhere in the world shows up. It's sort of like chat roulette, with your clothes on. So you show up for 5 minutes and you share something that's going on personally that you're struggling with so that there's empathy created. 5 minutes where that person comes prepared with some innovation or bold idea for the executive team that they want to share with them. And 5 minutes where the two just talk about it. 15 minutes, and they have found some golden nuggets. And what they found was that the headquarters used to be overweighted by serendipity with other headquarters staff. Now they're teaming out all over the world, and they're finding gems of ideas, high potential people all over the world that are getting to engage. And they've actually increased it from 5 to 10 a week because they were getting such value and such good ideas. Like I said, you can turn your town hall into an all hands, all corporate. Tony Robbins just used Zoom to do a 22,000 person meeting with all of his Date with Destiny. He had breakout rooms. There's no reason you can't truly co-create and boldly innovate. You could take the systemic racism question and come up with a series of questions of where is systemic racism in our organization? How are we going to diagnose it, measure it, train it, find it, whatever. You could put the most powerful and important questions that your company is grappling with right into the middle of a series of collaborative problem solving discussions and unleash your whole company Google Docking, coming up with ideas. Then you can take weeks to consume this information and then go back with gratitude for how they helped fundamentally transform your thinking. So these are just some general ideas. I want to end with just where you can find some of this recontracting stuff. And if you want to keep in touch with what we're doing, it's at keithferrazzi.com keith.com/battery. There. So, oops, I was sending this only to one person. I think that's it. keithferrazzi.com/battery. I'm going to go to Q&A now. Now, by the way, one of the things I screwed up, if I had thought about this in advance, I would have told you to start using the chat room to talk about what I was saying. We could have unleashed an entire thread of communication in the chat room synonymous to us. When, I don't know if any of you go to the TED conference this year, while the TED speakers were speaking, the entire audience was chatting about it. They were adding their own points of view. They were adding links. They were adding ideas. So they had an entirely asynchronous way to communicate and add content to the speaker. And that actually yields deeper engagement as well as to what the speaker is saying. You know, I'm writing an article that's coming out. We're writing a lot of work. I've launched this new initiative called GoForwardToWork. Colleen, thank you very much for that, for putting it in there. GoForwardToWork.com is our foundation, and we're researching. We've invested about $500,000 in hundreds and hundreds of executives coming together, sharing their best practices around a number of subjects. And we're going to be publishing more and more there. And it's ultimately a project with myself and Harvard Business School that we're curating, remote work, etc. The other place to go is virtualteamswin.com. Virtualteamswin.com. I think I'm spelling this stuff right. I suck at spelling. As a writer, I have a good editor. But there's a lot of videos there that if you want to look more into our research around virtual teams. But if you want to get the recontracting guide for your team, that you go to keithferrazzi.com/battery. So why don't you start asking me questions? Let's just start throwing questions in here. And then we can, turn you off of mute. We can rough it up. Come on in. The water's great. I'm looking at other panels here. Come on and turn your camera on and say hi. All right. Oh, Lainey, there you are. I'm just going to call on some people. I'm going to cold call. Lisa, I called on you earlier. What are you thinking? Lisa Countryman.
Hello, thank you. What am I thinking? I'm thinking about this idea of recontracting with a team. I'm a CEO and I have a new-ish, still forming team. Some of our team members have joined remotely. I'm curious what your guidance would be in terms of how transparent, explicit would you be in terms of just this notion of recontracting?
Very, because particularly with a new team, what a great opportunity to, and here's the challenge. Many startups have really high-performing behaviors. You wrestle ideas with each other. Of course, you would tell each other the truth. You're founders, you're co-founders. You still feel like you're a part of that beginning, et cetera, right? But the problem is, as you scale, you lose it. So one of my greatest heartbreaks is watching unicorn companies grow, and then they go over and hire some person from General Electric from the HR department and ruin everything, right? So the whole point is you're disrupting the world of work as entrepreneurs, and you need to also disrupt the way of work as entrepreneurs. And I think it's so important to have this recontracting conversation with a new team and say, by the way, and these are statistically valid. The stuff we're talking about have been proven over many years, correlated against outcomes, qualitative and quantitative. So it's a good roadmap to use in that recontracting guide. And, and it doesn't matter if it's remote. You can begin to, what I'm starting to show you is how easy it is. You can do all the stuff you used to do and better. Anybody else? Tyson, I haven't called on you. You were one of the first folks in the room. What are you thinking, bud?
Hey, Keith. Thanks. By the way, Never Eat Alone is a great book. It's been a long time since I read it. So when I saw your name pop up in an email, I was really excited to watch this.
Thank you. That just means I'm old and have been around for a long time.
I'm getting older too, and that's a good thing, right? So I work in the insurance business and manage over 100 producers in the West. And we are struggling incredibly from cradle to grave relationship building, right? We're in a very consultative business, and relationship building is key. And it is very, very challenging in this environment. And we're struggling across the company and the country in this. We're not the only region.
What type of insurance? Life or?
Yeah, so it's we're a national broker, property casualty, employee benefits, retirement, 401k across all.
So you're selling into benefits administrators, HR people.
That's right. Yeah. So kind of middle market size, larger companies, private and public.
So let me give you a couple of, and I'm sorry, I may be cutting you off with your ultimate question.
Good.
Okay. In the sales area, one of the things and I'm going to give you advice, and I'll give advice to a pharmaceutical company at the same time, same thing. In the olden days, getting out there and getting face-to-face with people is tough. And we all found at the very beginning of the pandemic, more people were coming to meetings than used to. And that was great because we had a little bit of extra time, as Lisa had suggested earlier. Now we found ways to fill our time with more work. And so it's not quite as easy to drop in. But here's an idea that I gave to a pharmaceutical company. They used to have pharmaceutical sales reps that would show up per doctor. They get a minuscule bit of time. What if you change the idea, instead of a pharmaceutical sales rep, what if you invite 5 doctors into a room where they get to share with each other on a topic that's important to them? How are they managing safety in the office? How are they keeping in touch with their clients? How are they whatever? Make up whatever thing you want. Now, all of a sudden, instead of one sales rep trying to get an ounce of time for one doctor, you have a sales facilitator that you don't even call them a facilitator, a salesperson. You call them a facilitator and a service person, managing a community of doctors coaching each other. Right? Now, what does that mean for you? One of the reasons, when I first started GoForwardToWork, redefining the future of the workplace. Listen, my company sells to they sell to entrepreneurs like Lisa, but they also sell to heads of HR for large corporations. So how was I going to get their time? I started hosting meetings like this on the future of work and how CHROs could help each other redefine the future of work. So now I'm a servant to a community of CHROs. And of course, that becomes a sales funnel for me. But I'm leading with service. And I'm leading with service, and 1 hour of my time ends up accommodating, sometimes 100 people. We now have hundreds of CHROs that I've never met showing up to our meetings because we're serving them by connecting them with each other. And what I do is I drop a journalist and a researcher in the middle of the conversation, extract all the best practices, document it, and send it back to them. But then not only just send it back to them, I send it out to their peers who get invited to the next meetings. So you really have to rethink your connect. If you look at your old sales model and say, how do I make that work in this world? You'll be struggling. If you step back and say, what does remote allow me to do that I could never do before? You could thrive.
Right.
So
Appreciate that.
That's just an idea.
Yeah.
And I don't know how, hopefully you can all sort of extrapolate your own versions of that with communities that matter to you, right? And you can create your own communities. I mean, Lisa, whatever segment you're in, you could find your peer group of other people in similar segments, non-competitive, and start hosting an every other week get together. Inc. 5000 is using our methodology of co-elevation for their emerging fast growth Inc. companies. What we've done is we've created co-elevation groups. And what a co-elevation group is, it's a group of peers that show up and they use a very simple process. I call it a 5-5-5. Every person who shows up to the peer-to-peer coaching rooms gets 15 minutes. Very similar to what I did on that drop-in idea. 5 minutes to share a struggle you're having. 5 minutes for the other members of the meeting to pepper you with questions. And 5 minutes for them to give you advice. And then you move on to the next person. So if you have 4 people in 1 hour, You've just had a really rich peer-to-peer coaching event. Why aren't you doing that in your own companies? Have people in your own company show up for an hour, 4 people in an hour, 5 minutes where they talk about a problem they're having, 5 minutes they get questions peppered to them by their peers, 5 minutes of advice, and you move on to the next person. Now you've unleashed coaching that didn't even exist before. Most cultures don't coach peers to peers. It's not a part of the social contract. But if you recontract and say, we care so much about each other, we're going to be each other's coaches, and then you in a virtual format create a simple way to do that, you've created a better culture than you would have had otherwise. You guys get it? Okay, who's next? You want me to cold call people, or is anybody willing to? Oh my gosh, there's lots of questions. Help
Colleen
me.
had a question that was seconded.
Okay, Colleen, can you help me?
Absolutely. I'm looking for Lane's
I wasn't paying attention.
Yeah, all good. I read the book and wish it had been with me in Jobs of Christmas Past. And how can I further engage our younger colleagues and be a mentor and peer at the same time? Yep.
So a couple of things. By the way, this the book we read, I hope you were saying this book or Never Eat Alone, I'm not sure which, but all of my books are so amazing. No, I'm just kidding. But if you read this one, I agree. This is the one I needed to read when I was younger. I wrote Never Eat Alone about my youth because I had that in my DNA. But this is the book I needed because it screwed me up when I was at Starwood, and I even talk about it in here how I didn't lead with co-elevation, but I think young people, if you want to mentor them, part of it is being their peers. One of the things we're learning about leadership today is the humility of leadership is much more appreciated than ever before, as opposed to standing up on a pedestal. But you all know this. I mean, you're the shining star example in the Bay Area of elevating people for talent, right? Allowing individuals, no matter their age, to be able to succeed as entrepreneurs, et cetera. And I hope your companies continue to do that as well. I mean, I became the youngest partner at Deloitte in my 20s and chief marketing officer because I just had a great idea that we needed to lift our brand. And I started to co-elevate with people around me until I created a movement of people interested in doing more on the brand of Deloitte. And I look back and wow, I became the CMO. And you need to encourage that kind of entrepreneurship, I think, and then give them the books. The books are very good tools. I wish I had read them when I was younger. Any other questions, Colleen? Or I'll start.
Here's a good one from Stephen. How would you apply this to an environment where you're moving from 10 employees to 100 over the next year, where there's no continuity? Where you're contracting instead of recontracting?
Yeah. So the benefit of this model is that it scales so quickly. Number one, I think organizations should focus more on the threads of work than the org structures. I go into companies that have org structures and they've just reorged, because what happens is if you reorg, you're reorging because something's not working at the interdependencies. The boxes bumping up against each other are creating problems. So you reorg. Well, guess what? You reorg and those boxes will just bump up against each other somewhere else. And in 18 months, you're going to need to reorg again. And we keep thinking about that as the model. Fuck it. I mean, look, the reality is the way we need to think about work is that we have goals and objectives aligned to people getting it done. So goals and objectives, and then a group of people. So if you give Jonathan a hill to take, Jonathan, we need to re-engineer this particular part of our product. I didn't need to shame you to come on video, but maybe that's what I did. But so Jonathan, we've got a part of our product. We need to re-engineer it. That's a hill you're taking. By the way, you're the Sherpa, not the owner. Meaning your job is to wrestle and to get these folks up the hill. And I'm going to put a co-Sherpa on this with you, because it's not just you in product, it's you in product and so in marketing. You're the co-Sherpas. By virtue of assigning 2 people to lead a sprint or lead a hill, you're easily thinking that now this is a collaborative effort from the very beginning, as opposed to digging into ownership. Now their job is to identify who's on the team. And the members of the team join, and in a remote environment, that's so easy. And people are on multiple teams around multiple threads of work. And these Sherpas identify what are the collaborative discussions we have. And you run your CPS and you break down the threads of work, and you do bulletproofing at the end of every week with key owners of work. It's a wonderful way to think about organizing your business, and has nothing to do with org charts. So we're right now using this to reorganize Delta and the way that its work is done. And it has nothing to do with org charts. You can keep your org charts, fine. That's the way you house boxes and do annual reviews, which I don't even care about. I want to do peer-to-peer reviews every day. We do an exercise when we coach a team called an Open 360. You should do this, Lisa, with your team. Walk into your team and say, okay, we're going to do an Open 360. We have to all go higher together. We need to open up coaching as a contract amongst us. So we'll start with me. This is Lisa talking. I want everybody to go around and say, Lisa, what I most admire about you and appreciate about you is X. I want to hear the positive feedback, please. And everybody goes around and says, Lisa, what I most admire about you is those glasses. I'm just kidding. What I most admire about you is your decisiveness, whatever it is. They go around. Then say to them, and then what I want you to say to me is, Lisa, because I care about you and you're important to our success, I might suggest. And I want you to tell me the truth, because if you do care about me and you do care about my success and our success, you need to give me this feedback. And then you have everybody do it. Now, in the early stages of this open, I call it an Open 360. In the early stages of these Open 360s, you'll get dial up and moderate candor. But what you'll find is that you'll begin to open the floodgates of that muscle, and you start exercising it. I don't know, you open the floodgates of a muscle, but anyway, you open the exercising of that muscle. Once again, so easy to do in a remote environment. You could do this in a physical environment as well, but you can invite people in so easily. But what that starts to do is again, we're adding practices to your staff meetings and to your meetings that redefine the nature of your team's behaviors. Some people call it culture. I don't like to call it culture because it's sort of like what networking used to be. It's this fuzzy amorphous word that means so many things to so many people. I just call it behaviors. I want to recontract how we show up with integrity, how we work with each other, how we commit to each other. What do we do and what do we don't do? Do we talk behind each other's backs, or do we say it in the room? What do we agree? Well, we're going to agree not to talk behind each other's backs. Great. Pinky swear? Great. Anything less than that is low integrity. And then you give the room to say it in the room. So to me, these are the philosophies of high-performing teams that I really want you to first start by recontracting. But here's the other thing I'll do. If you sign up for the recontracting thing, I'll also send you a video, if I can find it. Peter Diamandis interviewed me because I coach his team. I don't know if you know Peter. He ran Singularity University, X Prize, etc. Wrote the book Abundance, smart guy. I coach his team. He interviewed me for a couple of hours about all these practices. I'll follow up and send that to you as well as the recontracting guide. Lainey, would you remind me that I need to do that, please? Thank you, dear. All right, who's next? Who's next? Suzanne Chan. Sorry, can you mind coming off mute and tell me what you're thinking, or how can you help this group by asking a tough question?
Oh, it's end of day. I'll think of one.
I'm sorry.
Well, what's top of mind for me is meeting fatigue. To be totally honest, I know we're talking about how to create more meaningful meetings, but I also feel like because we lose that physical interaction with humans, we have to jump on calls more and so forth. But we're also hearing from our teams like, I can't take another Zoom meeting.
I'll give you 5 ideas on that. We just ran a focus group at GoForwardToWork, and this will be published at GoForwardToWork probably next week. So watch GoForwardToWork, sign up for the newsletter. You'll get this article. I interviewed 2 groups of 25 executives. I asked all of them to come to the room with the one thing they did that lifted energy in the last 6 months. So 50 people came with the one thing they did that lifted energy in the last 6 months. and then I aggregated it into an article. So, and what we found was, interestingly enough, that they were all derived from different things. So the first thing, this is maybe more than you asked for, but meeting fatigue is one of the things that are actually decreasing our energy. No meeting Wednesdays, very important, or no meeting Fridays. Just call it if you have the ability. Making sure that you say to everybody today, and it needs to happen, we need to reduce the number of meetings by 20%. Just go to your calendars. If you're a leader, reduce the number of meetings by 20%. So start to try to do this. We all know we've gotten glutted on it, right? The other thing is start every meeting, end every meeting with religion 5 minutes early. Maybe make it 10, maybe make it 15. No meeting can be more than 45 minutes, but always leave a buffer at the end so that people can get up, they can walk around, they can go to the bathroom, they can check their email, they can go check on their kids, they can do their kids' schoolwork, whatever it is. So important. That actually came from a lovely woman, a CEO of a company called Willow, which has created very breathable and comfortable breast pumps. So they're serving a female community. They have a large preponderance of females in the office, and they realized they had to engineer their company to be kind to women in the workplace. And so they came up with all of these ideas, and I interviewed her even specifically in this article. So there's a lot of things we can do just around re-engineering the meeting fatigue. It's so important. But I also tell you, Suzanne, if in meetings you do breakout rooms and you do all these things, the meetings don't drag on as much because you get more engaged. We want engagement. Now, we have 8 other categories that we identified are the sources of fatigue, everything from political fatigue. There's a lot of externalities going on in the world that are creating fatigue, and I'm not sure we can solve for those unless you're Patagonia and you're able to talk about all this stuff in the workplace. But we came up with all these areas of fatigue, including the fatigue associated with some people in the office and some people not, and that sense of not fairness. And so we actually went through all of them and we diagnosed solutions for all of them. We'll be releasing that study next week. Yeah, thanks for asking. It's a good one. I'm going to end 5 minutes early, just as a practice. Let me just say this. I love the battery. I don't get up there very much. And I hope that if y'all see me at some point, you'll come up and say hi. It's a beautiful community. I miss you all in San Francisco. I love the entrepreneurs up there. The only reason I'm down here is because it's warmer, but I love the people up there. And so I hope I get to know you all over time. Sign up for our newsletter, stay in touch. We do coach teams. So if anybody's interested in those services, all the way down, we've just started a new effort of coaching teams for equity, which is new to me and it's really exciting. And I'm picking 2 or 3 companies a year to work with just because I find it a lot more invigorating than no offense to General Motors, but there's something about working with you all that's kind of exciting. Okay, I think we should just end it at that and just leave you wanting more.
Thank you, Keith. Really appreciate this. We'll send a follow-up with some more resources for you all, including the recording from this, so you can revisit it and implement it with your teams. And if you have any other questions, you can email us at memberevents@thebatterysf.com and we can help you answer those. But
Beautiful.
Have a great night, everyone. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.